Well, welcome everyone. My name is Brian Raposo. I am a client director for HEAD. We are a local integrator, national integrator actually. I'm local to Houston. We got a fantastic event coming up for digital literacy. A lot has happened in our lives, all of our lives, over the past 2 months, and we'll continue to work through our own transitions back to work, back to travel, but most importantly back to school and education and bettering ourselves. So near and dear to my heart is our impact and a lot of the work that we're doing specifically with higher education at HEAD. And two of the best thought leaders that I've ever worked with in my career is joining us today as guest speakers. So Russell Kaurloto, Clemson University CIO, and Dr. Holmevik, Associate Professor for Digital Literacy. The purpose of today is really to just get a better understanding of, in light of COVID-19, there's just been traumatic change and dramatic impact to the education community. How that relates and correlates to the education community getting back to business for students, for faculty, for professors, for all of us alike, and more importantly, for the community to benefit from the education community getting back to business and really setting the tone for how digital literacy in America really is improved as a result of COVID-19 and how it's worked. So the goal of today is really just to have a roundtable for some of the experiences that COVID-19 has put on Clemson University, Russell and Dr. Yan, and really try to gain some insight from our own day-to-day business and our own day-to-day experiences from what they're going through with such a large and prestigious institution. So the agenda that I'd like to go through is really, again, conversational. So we don't have a tremendous amount of slides, although there is some background information we like to give around what is digital literacy. But really it's introductions, quick introduction of myself and Dell and John Knight, as well as Mike Flowers, but also, the COVID-19 crisis. What I'd like to hear from Russell is really what tactical and actionable things that he's really put in place for Clemson University during the COVID-19 crisis. So obviously there's some management response and some work that needs to get done. How has the university responded? What was Russell's role in that, and what's been the impact? Then we'll move over and also open that up for questions. So clearly, regionally, there's differences. Politically, there's differences in each one of the universities, as well as K through 12. Statewide, there's obviously political differences that we're seeing unfold on TV every day. So open it up to questions. Really, what are other people seeing that potentially, have some roundtable discussion with Russell that he could, gain and give some insight to. Then turn it over to digital literacy. What was digital literacy defined as prior to COVID-19? And now what have we learned in spite of the tragedy and the pandemic? What have we learned, and then how can we improve on that going forward? Comes down to actions, and in actions we need money. Then we'll move over to the budget impact. There's a fair bit of funding that's coming down from the federal government within the CARES Act. How is the CARES Act changing day-to-day decisioning at the universities as well as at K through 12? How's that decisioning really impacting technology? How's that impacting students' lives, teachers' lives, faculty's lives? We'll talk more about what digital literacy is, but really the budget side of it, you're not going to take technology away from people if they're at home and they're working on distance learning and the learning through Zoom. Coming back into the classroom, they're going to look at that same type of experience, and then open it up for Q&A, and then end the session. Okay. So again, my name is Brian Raposo. Really appreciate everybody having me on and appreciate everybody who's joining and participating. This topic, as I mentioned previously, is near and dear to my heart. I graduated college as a double major in Boston with history and secondary education. My first career prior to getting into technology was history and secondary education. So I was an 8th grade U.S. history teacher. I loved it. Fantastic job. And in Massachusetts, unfortunately, they require you to get, fortunately and unfortunately, require you to get your master's degree within 5 years and have the honor of paying for yourself. And fortunately, I couldn't afford to stay as a teacher, so I ended up becoming a Unix administrator. But always applied technology to my dealings with K through 12 and education. Throughout my career, I had spent some time at EMC, also spent some time in the integrated community now with AHEAD. I've always applied the same principles that I've learned in the classroom to what I do on a day-to-day basis, and I look at technology as that equalizer to be able to contribute and normalize education across school districts. So extremely important topic for me personally. I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. Mike Flowers, appreciate you joining and thank you for the support within Dell. Dell's always been a fantastic partner of ours. If you can introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I hope you guys can hear me. I had a little mute problems earlier. I'm going to proceed, assuming you can. I'm a data center storage sales rep here in the Houston area, and I support about a third of the school districts and colleges, maybe a little bit more than that. My focus is on school districts and colleges, so I only support the SLED accounts and been around the Dell family for about 7 or 8 years. So a lot of the customers on the phone are mine, so hello to you guys that know me. For those that don't, I'm assuming you know your rep, but if you don't, you have questions after this, feel free to call me and I'll be able to forward and get you in contact with the correct contact. One thing I'll point out about this presentation, in talking with my customers, the one thing I have seen is we've all faced these challenges. We've all had some level of success, but there's still a lot of unknowns where this is headed, what the long-term impact is going to be. And forums like this, in my opinion, give us the opportunity to share information that can benefit us all. And so I think as many of these kind of things as we can do as we face all these unknowns is probably pretty valuable. So I was excited when Brian contacted us and made this available, and excited about the content and being able to share it with you guys. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Brian.
And I know you're from Houston and you went to UH, so we won't hold this against you, but I don't see any orange or anything represented. So I had some socks. One of my son-in-laws graduated from Clemson. I watch every single Clemson game that comes on TV, every football game every year. So I have a lot of loyalty to Clemson. Okay. All right. Fair enough.
I forgot to wear the socks.
So let's turn it right over to the meat of the conversation. And, good front man, Russell, really appreciate you joining. Russell and I have known each other for probably going on almost 12, 13, 15 years now, mostly in Southern California from our experience with, I think we are being recorded, so I won't say the real USC, but University of Southern California. And at the University of Southern California, Russell was the CTO. We've done a fair bit of projects, and I would say also a fair bit of work in the disaster recovery space, not necessarily that we've seen a pandemic before, but obviously living on a fault line in Southern California has done things to really scar the technology community there to prepare them for crisis. So very well equipped. Definitely excited to have you on board with this conversation, Russell. He also has varied experience within the healthcare community, most recently coming from Children's Healthcare of Los Angeles, within University of Southern California, also responsible for 5 hospitals. And then also in the private sector, within the newspaper community with the Associated Press, So just a fantastic background and somebody we're excited to have on board. So Russell, welcome.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me, and thanks for inviting Jan and I to this informative discussion. And I want to make sure that this conversation is really resourceful for you guys and informational, and because we can cover a lot of different aspects of this. And we talked a lot about this earlier on, and want to make sure you guys get the best use of this. Coming into this whole aspect of the pandemic, I have what my colleagues say, the unwanted checklist. I started out my career with the Associated Press and it ran all the technology for the AP for the Western region for almost 2 decades. And it was during that time in the 80s and 90s, of which then, if you think about what happened in California during that period of time, the earthquakes, fires, riots, right? We had everything from plane crashes, OJ1, OJ2, and then fast forwarding to Clemson, hurricanes and tornadoes, and now the pandemic. I took those years of experience from the AP through to University of Southern California, where I served on the SCEC, the Southern California Earthquake Center, and understanding what it means for business continuity planning, disaster recovery, and brought that to Clemson. And so we were, I think, I'd like to think we take a little pride in that our team here was a little more ahead of the curve than most, and basically in preparation for the pandemic itself. We flipped 34,000 basically in less than 2 weeks to online. And I think to really drill down into the aspect of what we're talking about and what's really relative to what what's going on now for those on this call is that, how do you basically flip and how do you basically continue business continuity on the academic front, K through 12, higher education, let alone the business side of things, and do it effectively? One of the things is a key thing, Brian, you and I talked about this, and that is the difference between online learning and emergency distant education. And I think one of the key things is those who basically have been in that online world, your graduate programs and other institutions that have undergrad programs that are true online learning. Totally different scenario than what most have gone through, including Clemson, and that K through 12 and K through 12 as well, more direct, in that how do you basically teach in a remote mode versus a true online learning? And I think that what's going to come out of this is going to be somewhat of a rude awakening, and also a moment in time of which then could be really positive across all fronts from an educational perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Russell. And we'll get into some pretty tactical questions in a second, and that's fantastic. And I think we described just all over the board of how you've approached it. But one of the aspects that I think you've been very successful in your career of is you've come out of the theory and you've really looked at practical application of how this is fitting in, right? And the practical application of putting 34,000 people into a home, the work associated with that is far beyond the theory of what's the output that's going to be, or what's the result that's going to come from it. The network, the people, the devices, the actual outlay of getting there from a technology perspective. You've laid a lot of that foundation, as a core. So when you look at a crisis that's coming and you look at the response of that crisis and you move into just the core management of it, respond, recover, renew, which is fairly common within a crisis management. Well, a lot of the respond, you're building off of just core tenets that you've already done. So what I'd love to hear before we even get to the recover and the renew side, which will come later, is some of the just foundationally support that you've gotten from Clemson University to really lay the foundation of the framework that you've established.
Well, thanks. I think we're at the center stage of that was all of that planning from a business continuity, what we coined as academic continuity plans. fortunately for us, it was kind of interesting. I'll share with you, those who are Clemson fans, and that is we decided to have an e-learning day because football was on a Thursday night. And it was the first time for a Thursday night for Clemson, and here we are in that top tier from a football program. And so if anyone has come to Clemson for a football game, we have 80,000 inside the stadium and another 100,000 at tailgate outside of it. There was no way to be able to hold class. We decided to do an e-learning class on that Thursday for continuity purposes. And, and the inside joke was that, well, football's more important than the academics, right? So the aspect of it, that was the first, and we learned a lot from that e-learning moment. To have a second one after that, this is prior to the pandemic, and understanding coming into a hurricane season, of which then said, hey, let's do this again and sharpen the tools of what we had already established. And so we had some really baseline stuff already worked out. On the technology front, what we really did in response to it, in that business continuity, academic continuity, was then really take the IT department and retool it in a way that was more proactive. Outreach was key to everything that we were doing, white glove treatment, making sure that we were going over and beyond from a technology standpoint. And all the contingency plans, the what if. What if Zoom basically crashes? What if WebEx crashes? What happens if our learning management system crashes? So going through all of those scenarios and making sure we had all of those in place so we could respond accordingly. And we did so highly effective going into this. We had some bumps, there's no doubt about it. But what was interesting is that we found that the faculty, were unbelievably, and Jan will basically testify to this. The faculty really stepped up. They were not afraid, and in the past, of something of which they really were not interested in, or something they would deal with down the road. They basically embraced it and took it to a whole nother level, and understanding that this was the really key aspect of Clemson and being able to teach effectively to our students. And it was, and when that positivity basically started to show, more and more walls broke down. I think one of the big things that came out of this was that, and even the provost said to us, how can we continue after this is over with, managing and working the same way that we're working right now? The silos were broken down. Individuals were willing to set aside my turf, your turf, and collaboratively come together, knowing that at the end of the day, this is the livelihood and what we wanted to do for student success and the continuation of learning at Clemson University.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, right? I mean, culturally, you had the support of everybody there. All of us had local challenges. I think you and the campus and the management were hit twice. You talk about fatigue. We're all sitting back, and everybody on the call, I'm sure, has personal experiences of, their kids walking through the door. I had rope in my door previously to rope my kids or myself inside, so the kids wouldn't come in while I'm working and so forth. So everybody's got fatigue during this time. So keeping morale up is difficult. 2 weeks after, or week and a half, within Tornado Alley, you had a tornado come through the campus and knock power out for a period of time. So when you talk about cultural fatigue, you had the crisis within COVID, putting 34,000 people off campus. Then you literally had to deal with a natural disaster coming through campus, knocking power out. How's people's morale? How's the culture?
Well, I think that's something of which is indicative of which, I'm still learning because I'm not originally born and raised in the South. They basically stepped up and rose to the occasion from a real, true altruistic standpoint, because that tornado landed literally within a few miles of the campus itself, doing wow. $250 million in damage. And then basically, and still have to continue with our program the next day. The outreach was phenomenal. We had staff that basically the following weekend that were, offering and delivering food for over 150 that were displaced, making sure those that were displaced that were part of Clemson had a way of continuing. We had faculty that literally drove to the campus because they knew they could get Wi-Fi connectivity in the parking lots to be able to continue to teach classes. It's unheard of. It just kind of blew me away. Now, on the business continuity side, we had enough planning in place when I basically on that Monday morning told my team, I need a roll call, because I have 350 staff. I need a roll call of every single person, making sure that they're good. And when we basically hit the button in our communications plan that we had adopted and worked through prior, an hour and a half later, we had everybody present and accounted for, knew who was displaced and what kind of help we needed to support our own within that challenge. But again, Brian, to your point, everybody stepped up. It was a double shot, of which then we still had continuity through. And one of the things I want to make sure that one of the things you take away from this, one of the real things was that for the campus, and I know this is for everyone that's watching this as well, is that IT became relevant. In the past, IT was just there. They basically did things to make sure I could do my work. They took care of my desktop, not really understanding the back end support and all the things we needed to do to make sure, to continuation and the continuity and the foundational elements for the campus itself. We now have on a daily basis a debrief with the provost every single day, and it's me and a small circle of my IT leadership, and it's cross collaboration with RxCU Online. And so this was unheard of in the past. This type of collaboration effort was just phenomenal during this phase. And I'll share with you, coming out of this, it's actually going to be more difficult than when we went in.
Why do you say that?
Because the nuances of what we're challenged with going back in, and I'm talking about overall for the institution itself, and this is for K through 12 as well, is that from an IT perspective, we're taking a stance right now that we led going into the pandemic. We're going to lag on the IT side with a deliberate and direct approach and direct focus. Hold all IT folks at bay. We're already highly effective working remotely. There's no reason for us to move back in that first, second, or third phase. We'll wait till the end of it so that there's no disruption in that continuity moving back in. The challenge is going back in, and everyone knows it. It's going to be along the lines of, okay, what about if during the fall semester, do we bring all students back or not? Do we do a portion of them? Do we do the 6-foot distancing between each student, and how do you effectively do that? Do you test individuals coming in? That aspect of it. Do we open up our sports arena and use that as a teaching area, because the fact that you have more open space in our Coliseum than what you would in a classroom environment? All these questions are coming out, and these things which were decisions that you never had to deal with before in a continuity. This is really hard decisions to make for the best interest of your students while maintaining continuity. So this is going to be an interesting paradigm as we head into the fall semester, and the anticipation of, we may have the flu on top of the COVID flu.
Yeah. It's a tremendous amount to think about, and every industry has their specific nuances. I think within the education space, especially in higher ed, it's compounded because it's not just dealing with mass amounts of people that are coming in. We're very similar to, dealing with classroom sizes of several hundred people. Also, the sports arena, which is a very large, financial win for the university. But it's also, you're dealing with research development. You're dealing with the private sector. Clemson has, a lot of relationships with the private sector and the automotive industry inside of the Carolinas. How is the private sector, people like us, responded to your needs, and how do you see that business resuming when everything gets better, and more importantly, how's the infrastructure? Not more importantly, but specifically to you, how's that infrastructure playing a role in keeping that business going?
Well, this is the new norm. I think when it comes to that vendor type relationship, what's going to occur, and it's already occurred, is the outreach from vendors asking what they can do, what can they do better, what can they do differently. And I mean, there was countless throughout this whole aspect of it. it's one of where what we're looking for more anything is the stability of that infrastructure itself and what we can build on in this new norm. And what I mean by new norm is that from a higher ed perspective is the blending between those two. We're looking at an approach that says, okay, we'll have students come into classroom environments. And if we so choose to, or the individuals decide not to come into class and want to stay outside of it, the continuity then says, why not basically go ahead and do a blended environment where you have Zoom or WebEx. For us, it's going to be Zoom in the classroom. So a professor can teach in the classroom itself while holding online at the same time and create that interaction between those who are remote and including those who are in the classroom itself. It's never going to be absolutely perfect, but we think that this is the new norm of what that's going to look like. Now, the technologies that go into that and the things behind it, it's going to be ever changing. We're going to see new things that are coming out of this because of that new norm. Some we already have, but others that we're not thinking of that will play heavily into this. And that's why we teed off with the whole aspect of the difference between online learning and remote teaching. Most K-12s do not have a true LMS and an online learning system. This is going to be relative, and this is going to be key going forward. Connectivity is a whole nother issue of which then we could spend another hour on talking about the whole social aspects of it and the digital divide, the haves and have-nots, and how do you level access and equity. At Clemson, and as you know, we're a premier institution. We handed out over 430 Wi-Fi access points, hotspots, cellular hotspots, so to ensure continuity for our students in remote locations that did not have that level of connection. So this is an interesting time. This is going to be something of which then is going to really, really change the way we're doing things going forward. Now, that said, this next step, in which where Jan's going to pick up, and this is where I talk about, what's the new norm look like, is then that digital aspect of it. So everyone keeps talking about, what is digital literacy all about? What does this really mean? And how does this apply to what we're doing, even in an online environment? And I'm proud to say that you'll see what Jan has put together and does on a regular basis as a professor is just outstanding. And I think this is truly the new norm for teaching going forward. So with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Brian. Any other comments or anything along those lines before we go ahead and move forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to open it up. And Caitlin, if you could open up the line if there's any questions before we go to Jan, that would be great. And you do make a really good transition to Jan's digital learning, digital literacy business, because your infrastructure and what you lay down from a data perspective is going to enable the business output that Jan can put to work. But at the end of the day, if you're not thinking about how that infrastructure can play into many different use cases, and that infrastructure is, and I say infrastructure, and I'm using the term, is not hardware, but hardware, software, policies, process, all of the business of what data can ultimately enable for a business. Having a digital literacy program and use cases that Jan can go to work on requires a tremendous amount of forethought on your part. And I think you've done a fantastic job building that out in light of everything that's happened with COVID-19, and hopefully the silver lining here could be that now the leadership, the board, and everybody sees from a day-to-day perspective all the work that you've put in laying that infrastructure to be able to help those use cases really take practice, right? Which is fantastic. So Caitlin, if we could, let's open it up to the line. If there's any questions before we get over to the digital literacy team, feel free. Let's start.
So far, there's nothing in the Q&A, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to enter them in there, and then we can unmute you as well if you have further thoughts.
And this is Mike Flowers. I'll start with one. So one of the things that you talked about that I find interesting, especially for the K through 12s that I'm talking to, where they don't really have a traditional remote learning LMS type system. A couple of mine did have a little bit in place, but nothing that would scale to an entire district. One of the things you mentioned was, hey, we also have to plan for what if we have problems with Zoom or WebEx or the LMS system. And I guess all the conversations I've had so far really have been around, we got to get it working. But I haven't really heard a lot about, we also have to have continuity, business continuity for those systems as well. Are there other parts of that you can expand upon a little bit maybe? Because I think that's something that we might see, in the next phase, right?
I can answer that because I'll give you a sense of the contingencies we were talking about and the thought process around it, knowing that an entire nation globally is going to jump on Zoom or WebEx.
Exactly.
And it's cloud-based. It's not something that from an IT perspective we maintain or control. What we could do to offset that. So what we did was is that key to it was our learning management system, our LMS. We actually, and it's cloud-based. We actually, since we had the infrastructure available, because we're an R1 university with a high-performance computing center that's ranked 4th in the nation, 50-something worldwide, we basically created and built our own instance of Canvas on-prem with the likelihood, if in fact an event occurred that we could not, or Canvas was to fail, we could just basically change a URL link and basically you were connecting back to that system on campus. On the Zoom, on the WebEx, we did the same thing with WebEx because it's Cisco-based and we could do the same thing. But the rudimentary things that you don't think about, and that is what we did is in every course, we basically put in there for every faculty member a capability of a simple conference call number. They could reach out to their students if in fact Zoom was to completely fail. And if it was going to be day after day after day. So you think of it from the most rudimentary and scale up to those points that you want to get to, which is, from a true seamless type of model. We basically worked that all the way through. So that's literally how we focused on it, from the baseline of how you would communicate on through to from a phone conversation right on through to what you would have from a Zoom or WebEx call. Does that help?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
Perfect. Caitlin, any other questions that are out there?
Nothing in here yet, but I'll keep you posted if any of them pop up.
Fantastic. All right, so let's move over, and it's a pleasure to introduce Jan. I've actually had the opportunity to see Jan present in Los Angeles at an Adobe higher education conference. Not sure if those will resume anytime soon, but the messaging and the amount of representation that we had from all of the education community, not just higher ed, that we had in that conference was fantastic, and the reception that Jan received, and really building out a baseline for what digital literacy means, and then really setting the tone for the vendor community, us, Adobe, Microsoft, and the entire community of how they respond and work with the education sector and start to set baselines is really insightful. So pleasure to have you on board, Jan. Welcome.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me. I'm really delighted to be able to repay your kindness for the helping us with that event out in LA. So I'm happy to be here. I have been a professor at Clemson for going on 14 years. Before that, I was working in higher education in Norway and Denmark. So I've been through quite a few interesting changes, and I think what we're faced with at this moment is probably one of the most momentous opportunities that we have had ever. And I'm going to share, if I can have access to share. I have a presentation here.
Switching it over 1 second for you.
Sure. Okay. All right. So I just learned a really new great phrase today, and that is the Great Reckoning. And I'll return to what that means, but I really feel like, I hear this called a number of different things, but the phrase "the Great Reckoning" is, I think, spot on for what we're facing, and what it means. What the reckoning part means is that we have to come to terms with how we have done things in the past, and then also what we need to do in order to move ourselves forward. So I have a presentation here that is built off of one that Russell and I did at Adobe Max in November of 2019. And with the changes that has happened over the past few months, we have really been able to capitalize on our investment in the digital literacy program on Adobe. So that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about. I want to show a couple of, for those who don't know, because I'm sure there are folks who aren't that familiar with Clemson. We have been a top 24 or in the top 20 to 30 ranked consistently for the past 20 years. We have taken a step into R1, which is research highest university ranking on the Carnegie scale. And that has, for the second time now, so they redo that every so often, and we're now in that group of 110 research universities. And we have some national football championships, and we have some really, really good students. So we were going on really well. In my past couple of years, I've worked with faculty leadership and interfaced a lot with our upper administration, and there's been a very sort of positive forward motion for Clemson. The sky is the limit kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, this thing happened, and everything changed. And it was almost overnight, although arguments could be made that we should have seen this happening, the possibility of it. But I think in our defense, very, very few people actually realized what could have happened. But anyway, as Russell said, with the changes that happened and the need to move online, we had very quickly the need to spin up online instances of these courses. And so going from a face-to-face instruction reality to an online delivery using Zoom and WebEx and some of these other technologies had to happen basically within the span of a week. We had spring break in between, so the last online class, the last face-to-face classes happened before spring break, and then coming back from spring break, it was all online. And so for those of us who've taught with technology for all our careers, this was not a huge imposition or challenge, but for a lot of my colleagues who have not done that, this was really a game changer. That and I got to give them a lot of credit for, as Russell said, even coming in and sitting in their cars in the parking lot in order to get Wi-Fi, after the tornado and so forth, was really showing what the faculty here is also made of. So the situation now is that we're finishing this. We finished out the semester. This is from one of my classes. The last day, you can see the students are all happy they're graduating. And I just want to point out, in this particular class, in the weeks leading up to the end of the semester, 2 of the students secured jobs, and I was really pleased with that. And they actually, both of them have started already in their new jobs, because here is the reality of what is happening with our job market. you can see where the cliff is. And it's a really steep cliff that we went over in terms of jobless claims. And the last week, almost 3.2 million have filed for unemployment claims. So this is a real serious situation. 33.5 million claims over the last 7 weeks. And I wanted to put up this slide here because it shows some reported or poorly understood structural problems, I think, in our society. And if you look at these numbers, everything goes well, and then all of a sudden everything goes off the cliff, and that reveals a structural systemic problem with regard to the kinds of jobs that people have and the kinds of skills and the opportunity that they have to secure new employment once this happens. So I'll return to that in a moment. So this is, of course, the historic trends. As you can see, projected for April, we're up to 16% unemployment, and that's moving even higher. Back in the 1930s, you see in the Great Depression, it was peaking at 25%. So we're possibly getting into that territory, which is really problematic and challenges us in education to really rethink what we're doing in order to be able to meet the needs that are going to manifest themselves going forward. And so that brings me back to the idea, sort of this great reckoning. This is from Time magazine. So I wish I'd come up with the term, but I have to credit it to Time magazine. So what is going on here is this is an eye-opener. It's not just about, okay, let's get over the hump and back to normal, because there is no going back to the normal as far as I can tell. There's going to be a changed world after this pandemic has played itself out. And we are in that moment right now where we can influence how that new world is going to look like. So that is our responsibility as educators. And leaders, both in academia and in business as well, to be part of that change and part of that forward thinking about what the world's going to look like. So then that's where the IT guys can play a big role. And you've heard Russell talk about what he and his team has done at Clemson to engage with the current problems and crises. Now, I would point out I've worked with Russell since he first came on a couple of years back, and we've had a really good working relationship on the ideas of digital literacy as a baseline skill going forward for everybody. If you think back to the slide that I showed where we go off the cliff in terms of unemployment, those people who lose their jobs are going to are they able to find new jobs in a new economy, in a new reality? Have we set them up for success in moving, social upward mobility and so on? And I don't think that we have. If we look at the racial breakdown on racial numbers, you will find that, and I was trying to look for just before we started here, numbers that show, but definitely what I've seen so far, I couldn't find it, but it shows that African Americans and Latinos are disproportionately represented in the unemployment statistics, as well as in the actual infection rate. So we have a system. That's what I mean by a systemic problem, and the solution begins with education and reskilling and skilling. So this then comes back to what kind of skills are those, and what does digital literacy really represent? And according to Gartner Research, which is a reputable institution when it comes to these things, 57% of senior leaders say that soft skills now are more important than hard skills. So what are the soft skills that companies are looking for today? Well, one is creativity. So creativity is the ability to be inventional and think out new things and be be a change agent, a factor for change. The second is persuasion. That is my field, really. That another word for persuasion is rhetoric, and that is the ability to persuade people to buy into your ideas and moving forward with those ideas. Thirdly, collaboration. As projects grow increasingly more complex, global collaboration grows more and more important. And we see this in business, where you have now teams spanning the globe working on projects in new ways and in new medias as well. And then adaptability and agility, being able to navigate in a changing world and being able to adapt to those changes. So those are four of the skills, that soft skills, that business leaders think about when they think about the power of the new workforce. So when Clemson went in, started up the digital literacy program back in 2013 and 14, the premise was that digital literacy is a baseline skill for the 21st century, and it should be about access and equity for everyone. So we went in with coverage for every student, faculty, and staff. And I'm going to show some numbers here once I get a little further on, but it has been now we're entering our third period with the digital literacy program, and I'm really, really pleased with the impact that this has had. Like I said, two students in a class there were 3 graduating this semester in that class. And so 2 of the 3 already got jobs, and largely because they had these digital storytelling skills. They're both working as digital storytellers and technical communicators. So that's a strong testament in my view. So when Russ came on board at Clemson, he and I started thinking about what is the next stage for the digital literacy program. And we came up with this concept of the big tent, which is basically a metaphor to describe all these efforts across the university and the enterprise coming together under a big roof, big top, and be able to collaborate. There were a lot of efforts, and this is something that all institutions have, great efforts, great initiatives going on in different verticals, but they don't seem to have a good way of interfacing or collaborating. So what we did with Big Tent is we're building out those collaborative opportunities for people, and also as an opportunity to foster more industry partnerships. So the program that we run with Adobe has been incredibly impactful, and we're interested in expanding on that as well within other areas. So the idea being that this program is not something that is just about adding technical skills or know-how about how to do video and how to do social media. It's really also, and perhaps more importantly, about developing a new form of thinking, a creative thinking, being smart, being an innovator, and being adaptable. And that's something that we've worked hard to achieve. So meeting the demands of the post-COVID world, or after the Great Reckoning, this is where we're sitting at the moment. And I think going into this, being able to continue to use all the Adobe software for all our students, whether they're sitting at home on a laptop, on a mobile phone, or a tablet, has been a tremendous asset. And I can't really stress enough that this was completely part of the plan when we moved in. Of course, we didn't think that there was going to be a pandemic that would force everybody offline, but the access and equity aspect of it was part of our initial thinking. So we're deploying Creative Cloud for over 35,000 people, 28,000 students, and 7,800 faculty roughly are beneficiaries of this program. of course, the return on investment is something that everybody is interested in. And last semester, I had some of our folks from the analytics team here that Russell has started do some data mining to see what the situation looks like. And I'm happy to report that we have increase in our usage across the board on all colleges. There is an uptick, even in colleges that you wouldn't normally expect to see use of creativity software, such as business, engineering, and science. But as this graph shows, all of those areas have a healthy usage of the Adobe Creative Cloud software. Here are some of the programs that are using it and the percentage that students are adopting Creative Cloud. So creativity matters, and there's a different side of that investment as well, and that is the success stories that come out. Now, we don't have time today to go into that, but if I can share this presentation with Brian if he wants to send it out to you all. But this is a representation of all of our students by activity, and each little dot is a student, and the size of the circle is their activity level on Creative Cloud. So you can see that there is a hardcore there in the middle who are really power users. And so who are they? Well, with data analytics, we're able to figure that out. This is our #1 most active user. She is using it not only for her coursework, but she's also using it to run an online business. So she is one of those users who have access to technology through her school, but is able to make her, a business run off of it as well. So that's one of the great benefits that we can see. This is Xavier Kelly. He was a defensive tackle for our football team, national football champion. And he was able to participate in what we call the micro-internship program. We have micro-internships with different companies. And he went out to Adobe for a week and got to know some of the folks there. He's an artist as well, so he was opportunity to connect with them. And of course, we know that most of our athletes will never be professional players, but the ability for them as well to take part in this has been really important. And this is Matthew Chambers. He's our director for visual analytics at Clemson, but he's also a student a PhD student in my program. And he was in a class last year where he was able to show how the digital literacies that he already knew from data visualization through Tableau could be greatly improved and enhanced through digital storytelling and contextualization using video. So again, I'm not going to play any of these videos, but if Brian sends this out, then we can share that. And so in conclusion, the thing to remember is that, and I always say this, we're in the tomorrow business and we're creating the next generation of leaders and innovators today. And the digital literacy program is a key and integral part of that and what that world's going to look like after the Great Reckoning. And so that's my presentation, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Yeah, that last slide that you had, Jan, who were those two young guys that you had there?
Yeah, that was the core team here, the dream team.
So Brian, I have to share with you one of the things that kind of puts it in perspective. When you start talking about the whole teaching digital literacy, if you get to see just one of the works that's like the one that he showed that with Matt, particularly one of the others, it puts it in perspective, because I'll have Jan talk for just a brief moment about what he asks his students to do and what they come back with from using this technology from a digital literacy standpoint is phenomenal. So for those who really don't get a sense, Jan, it'd be really good just in 20 seconds or less, what you basically charge your students to do and what they come back with.
Yeah,
Virilio as the example would be one of what Matt basically had keyed in on.
Yeah, thank you. So basically what I teach in all my classes is innovation. And so I try to teach people to think innovatively and be creative in the process of doing that. And so in rhetoric, which has been traditionally very text-focused, people read books and write papers, I had to think about what does that mean for students coming into a rhetoric program, working with new media. And so the readings are still there, and we read the old theories from Aristotle to Derrida and so forth, and Virilio, as you mentioned. But the way that people are asked to process this is different now because we have these new media, using film as an example. Premiere Pro, they are tasked with creating responses that are not summaries of what they read, but they need to take what they read and use that as inspiration to come up with new ideas through the responses. So what Matthew Chambers did was I give them what I call a creative heuristic, which is a spark to kind of set them off, and it usually is just a word. And, as writers, the, blank page syndrome is something that we always struggle with, and so I give them this key word. In this case, for that particular project, it was the word spin. So what he did in his video was he wanted to visualize the climate change and the rising temperatures over the past 100 years. And so what he did was, using Tableau, he set it up to spin it around the Earth, and it shows that in the last 15 years, it has really gone through the roof, and using the theory from the rhetoric to make the case. It was a really, really compelling piece, and I've shown it a lot. And Brian, if you want to share the presentation, the link in there, you can all watch it.
Yeah, I definitely do. And Jan, what I really wanted to what I love about your presentation, and now bringing it back to the combination of why I believe you and Russell are a fantastic combo and a team, is how you get the creativity out of the groups and the students that you work with. Really comes down to a very fundamental data analytics component that you're constantly reviewing and analyzing how to build off of a baseline that continues to grow the students. So, for example, if you could pull up that one slide that you had, actually I think it was on the website, where wherever it was, with the sphere that showed each student as a bubble within the sphere. And then you can drill down into the data component of it. I do want to spend a second just diving a little deeper on that. Yeah, perfect. So, as you drill down, and if you could click on one example, that'd be great. But essentially, what's here is, yes, it's going to give you, the educator, an opportunity to really get into great detail about your student. And I look at this in other fields, like, for example, the hospitality industry or the gaming industry. There's a concept called, and we've talked about this previously, a concept called Guest 360. When a guest comes into a building or a hotel or a casino, their movements and their likes, or if they automatically go to a certain gambling table or they go to a certain restaurant, their profile is automatically started to build up and categorize. You're doing that with the student. So I look at this entire sphere as the ability to build the student 360 profile. Behind the scenes, the technology associated to that is the foundation that I mentioned previously that Russell was able to lay out. The amount of data in order to drill down into one of these dots for a particular student is very critical for you to make decisioning with that student and how you give them a creative heuristic, and then for them to take it to the next level, because you have, and I'll talk technology, but you have a logging tool like a Splunk or a logarithm or an Elastic that's pulling data from many different tools that's logging that environment. You have connections and instrumentation out to a learning management system. You have connections out into other teaching tools like Adobe. Then you also display that, which is what we see here, through Tableau and or other visualization tools, but here specifically is Tableau, where now you can display it and you yourself can create a business use case for all of the technology that's associated underneath. This is data analytics at its finest for an education. When we look at, with that?
Yeah, go ahead, Brian. Sorry, I got a comment over here.
And now when I look at what COVID-19's represented is we now have to start younger, and you talked about access and equity. We have to start this type of, I don't want to say profiling is the wrong word, but this type of data collection for students and start the Student 360 process at a much earlier age. And I would love to understand what the role of higher education is to communicate and start to build this type of data and Student 360 diagramming for K through 12. And how can we as providers, Dell, ahead, build that infrastructure so K through 12 and ISDs can really start to take advantage of building an opportunity for a teacher to say, here's the creative heuristic I want this child to really take on for the next, semester, 3 months project, right? So I'll stop, but what I really wanted to do was just dive deeper about what this chart means to me and how data is really used in the education space, and it's a fantastic example. So kudos.
So Brian, there's a couple of things, and I'll hand it over to you, Jan. A couple of things that play into this, and it's multiplistic in that what this really then showcases it from a technical standpoint. You're making informed decision making from a learning perspective. It's visual learning and understanding what visual learning and digital literacy is truly about. I'll share with you one of the things that really plays into this aspect of and what you're talking about is that K through 12, even through higher ed, is that I spent a lot of time working with Sam Gussman for the Visual History Institute, the Shoah Foundation at the University of Southern California, who basically offers the collection of the Holocaust victims and all the recordings that they have done, the testimonials, to K through 12 and higher ed to be able to teach zero tolerance, that aspect. But the key aspect of it, it's visual history. It's about the visual parts that you're basically going forward. If you go all the way back, and something that Sam and I have had conversations about, back to the beginning of time, it was not about reading. It was about diagrams. It was visually driven, and then move forward to more of a reading context, right? So this is something of which then we realize now that the visual component of this is what's driving all aspects of it. And as an ancillary aspect of it, yes, absolutely. We now have data of which then we can make more informed decisions around who's actually focused on what areas, where should we be targeting in a more focused area of which then, because one part of our school is only using, from a digital literacy, 23%, where another part of the school is using 63%. Where's your focused attention going to go, right? That's the part of which then we're really focusing and driving, and not getting into the whole, which is a whole other slippery slope, the privacy and all those other things that play into this. It's really about student success. And if you really are serious about student success, this is the approach you take. This is what you leverage. And this is where you blend that technology infrastructure on top of those like a Dr. Jan Holmevik, who can actually leverage it and teach in a way that now have students of which then are going into the workplace, 2 students hired in the middle of a pandemic. Right? So this is something of which then we really are tracking as we're going along. So we think we're on the right track.
Yeah, and I know we got to move on. I just want to add a point to what Russ is saying. I want to bring it back to the unemployment numbers and the cliff that we've just gone off. And I think that's where the call to action really is now. I mean, what are all educational institutions, and we were starting at K through 12 and going through universities, we're going to have to respond to that, because a lot of these jobs that are now being shed are not coming back. They're not coming back. They're being either phased out, they're being replaced by something else. And so there is a group of people now who's going to find themselves in dire straits. they are in dire straits, and they're not going to be any easier to navigate going forward because they lack the skills, they lack the connections, they lack the opportunity. And so there's going to be need for continued education for adults who need to reskill and retrain. There's going to be a great need for that. And then we need to set up coming generations, like the education system being geared toward a certain workplace reality has to make that change and make that leap to the next, what is it, the next job market's going to look like. It's going to come back, but it's not going to look like what it did in January. Like that's not happening, and it's not happening anytime soon either, no matter what people like to think.
Well, and in every industry, and I think in education, it's definitely, there's a spotlight on it, but in every industry, the companies that have the best data and that are making decisions against that data are going to be the ones that get over the hump and survive, right? And their employees are in the best shape. And what I found is, and I cover all sectors, not just higher education, but what I found is a lot of automation is being put into place. So not just automation from an infrastructure standpoint about deploying technologies, mobile devices, mobile, portable infrastructure like a desktop and so forth, although that's extremely important in this day and age. But what I also found with an automation is around process. And there is a lot of technology that we can put into play where we automate a process. And a great example is, fortunately, I'm working with a major hospitality retailer where they've let go of 80% of their corporate staff, 80%. And the normal tasks of procurement where technology can look at an email with a robot, and parse the email for critical keywords, and then literally dispose the rest of the email, take those critical words and start a workflow, is happening. So what's that going to do as the furloughs of these people whose emails are being crawled right now when they come back? No question it's going to change if they do come back, but it's also going to force the business to make decisions on what's going to happen. So every industry is in that place where automation is not just on a physical piece of software or hardware, it's also looking at people's process. So it's extremely critical as work comes back to the new normal, after the Great Reckoning, how we look at truly creating an environment or an infrastructure similar to what you've created that can allow people with decisioning power to make the best decisions on data, right? And and I think we've seen a fantastic example. We don't have much time left, so I did want to open it up to questions. And there's a really one of the I did want to speak about why Dell is part in hosting and sponsoring this meeting. Is a lot of the work that we do to help provide for that infrastructure to help enable the data to be loosened up and actually actionable. Dell's been providing for AHEAD for years, and they're fantastic in that space. So the partnership that they've created has been tremendous. When we talked about your sphere and looking at creating that Student 360 view and all of the interconnects that need to happen, they've looked at API technology that can really put that into one central location and make that easily connectable. The mobile workforce has been fantastic in enabling that business to continue. So, this was a very, thoughtful call for us, both on the data analytics side, but also on how do we prepare as vendors to support that business. So I would love to hear from everybody on the call if we could, and open it up to questions, Caitlin, if we could. What can we do as vendors to really support, as you said, the Great Reckoning when people come back to business, and if it's education, if it's more of changing the way we look at the business, I would love to get a perspective there.
And so, Brian, I'll take that one. It's one of where, and Jan and I have had many conversations around this, and that comes back to when we talk about the big tent analogy. And what we're looking for more than anything else is that, and I think this is a major opportunity for those basically that are in that business enterprise to partner with universities or specifically us, right? In this sense, and that is, if you're basically on the sponsorship side and partnering with us, would you not want to be part of the success of that student, or potentially that student going to work for your company, knowing that they have these capabilities that enhances what you're doing from a business enterprise perspective? What Jan's talking about is that at the end of the day, we're looking at student success. What is it that we can do, right? And the access, and you have to slide up, the access and equity is key to that, and making sure we're leveling that playing field across all fronts. One of the things that Jan and I are talking about, we've looked at Ohio State, is a common platform for all students across all fronts. Maybe it's an iPad for every student. Maybe it's a service. Ohio State has gone down this path. It's one of where that levels the playing field for access and equity, but we need partnerships. We need partnerships on the application development side. We need partners on the digital acquisition side of it and data acquisition side of things, right? Literacy is a real key component of it, in partnering in those areas. So we look at it from a different lens than what most others do, in that we want to make sure that there's an avenue for our faculty to be able to have that partnership that basically enhances the student success, gets them into the job market with a means and delivery of which then differentiates from the rest, whether that's 4-year or 6-year, and how to track it and manage it throughout that entire paradigm. And it's moving back. We talked about it from K through 12. We know from a university perspective, at 8th grade, 7th and 8th grade, is really key areas and laser focused as how effective they're going to be when they graduate from high school and be prepared to go into a university setting. I think those walls could potentially break down. I think the reckoning of this is that a closer relationship in that regard may occur or may not. I think because if there's a common digital literacy or learning management across those fronts, it's seamless for that student as they move through the paradigm of education.
Yeah, it's perfect. I think that leads into, really how we conduct ourselves, and thank you for that. And I know I opened it up to the call, but if you could just actually type your questions into the Q&A section, and then we'll get there. There is a number of people on the call, and I was unaware opening it up would cause a little bit of chaos. But if you could ask your questions in the Q&A session, we'll get to it. I want to move to the next slide if I could. Let me. I believe this is from a COVID-19 standpoint on the digital literacy impact. I think we've covered that, but now let's get to the practical side. There's money coming down the pipe, and we're trying to do things within the federal government, local government, the private community to spur movement and to spur activity, right, and to get people back to work and get people back to the new normal. From the CARES Act perspective, I think there was a total of, Russell, $13.8 million, $13.6 million that was going to Clemson, of which $6.8 million has to go directly to the students. So I'd be interested to see, has the board really looked at technology, and I don't know what the percentage of budget the technology got previously before COVID-19. Be interested to hear, one, is that changing the percentage side? And then the second is, and there's only certain categories, obviously, the money can be spent on. And then second is, if you do get any resurgence from budget, where do you think that you would spend that money, right?
So on the CARES Act itself, we're still parsing that through. One of the things that's been, the 13 million that we're gaining, we're already 20 million in the hole going into this and transitioning to online, and I know other institutions, it's double that, depending on your preparation, what you had in place. The direct funding for students themselves is to look at the Pell Grant students and that aspect of it, to being able to then fund those individuals to shore them up. So there's that access and equity piece of this. When budgets come back the other way, it really is like right now, to give you a sense of, from a budgetary standpoint, is that classrooms now need to be retrofitted. And I talked about it, to have them retrofitted, to have the ability to be able to go to a flipped or blended environment of which then you can teach online. From a digital literacy standpoint, funding could go into, we talk about that common platform, applications that you need to have that access and equity and being able to then push that out. One of the key factors in all of this that played a major role in this is communications. How do you make sure that you're communicating effectively to all your faculty, staff, and students? These are really the key factors. And then enhancing the learning management system and where that's going to prevail. But for the most part, a lot of this funding is going back into what we've already spent coming out, and then looking at making sure we're shoring up on the student side what they need to make sure that they're not being dropped out of this because of the pandemic itself. Really a key factor, and all institutions are faced with this, and ensuring that aspect of it. Biggest fear for everyone is that everyone talking about that gap year. 20-30% of students basically coming out of high school decide, I'm now going to take my gap year. We know statistically the numbers that could take a gap year who don't come back. We also know that if we were to do that, the impact to every university in the nation in that regard as well. Some may not survive. And so from a funding standpoint, it's really going to be a critical factor. And it's really the CARES Act, while we applaud it, is really just a small portion of a Band-Aid, of which then from a much more bigger dynamic, of which then what Jan just presented, when you take a look at what the unemployment rate's is at right now and will continue for the next several months. So that's basically where our focus of attention is. On the research side of things, I want to make sure we're clear. One of the things we see as a positive coming out of this is on the grant side. We foresee that from NIH and from other three-letter agencies, that there's going to be a concerted effort of which then, from areas of which then were left behind during this, that could actually prevail and actually be a real positive for universities on the research front. We did not see a drop in research throughout the entire pandemic, which then showcased that really with the infrastructure that we had in place, one, they could continue, but also where, relatively speaking, that it wasn't affected at the level of what it would be from other areas. So we see that as a real positive opportunity moving forward.
It's great. Thank you, Russell. Yeah, there's, obviously everybody's scrambling. Everybody's looking at areas to try to make right. And I think you've done a fantastic job, and the university's done a fantastic job to do what's right first, and then figure out the funding and the money later. And I think that's ultimately what we look for in higher education. And I think there's been a number of examples of that, at least in the news, where that's happened. And I know there's also a tremendous amount of restrictions on what you can do with endowments and what you can do with your existing budgets and how those get spent and what they recoup and so forth. So I think you almost need a whole separate analytics team to figure it out.
I'll leave this and I'll hand it over to Jan. One of the things is that we didn't talk about, and I think is going to occur, which I see in the tea leaves. I'll be surprised if it doesn't. So I'm being cautiously optimistic, in that now will be a direct focus on that last mile, the digital divide to the home. K through 12 was the most impacted, more so than anywhere else in the entire country. K through 12 was hammered by it because of the fact that those basically, in an access and equity standpoint, the have-nots basically were left out. And I think now it's time of which then to go back to what occurred way back when the bells basically were forced by the federal government, which subsidized them to offer telephone lines to farm communities in the middle of nowhere, so they could actually have communications in those areas. This is where I think it's going to be a game changer going forward and could change the overall dynamic for the.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take that. So can I just share my screen again real quick? I just wanted to remind
Of course.
Okay. So as Russell was talking about the haves and the have-nots, I think that I want to bring it back to this one because this really reveals a lot of the size of those have-nots, in the sense that those who are filing for unemployment claims right now are what we're seeing is that the inequality in our society is being staring us in the face in a pretty brutal way right now. Those of us who are fortunate enough to be able to sequester in place and work from home, our problems are paling in comparison to those who have to be out on the front lines and maybe even get sick and then lose their jobs. You think about hospitality industry. Think about the cruise industry. When are they going to come back? They're not going to come back anytime soon. Who wants to be on a cruise ship right now with other people and potentially be infected and not be able to escape? Think about the airline industry, who and all of the travel, business travel that has been sustaining the airline industry and hotels and conferences, conventions, and all those kind of things. Businesses are cutting back on travel, realizing that Zoom and WebEx and these other virtual systems can be effective, and maybe we don't need to send people around the country on a daily basis, and so on and so forth. And that has repercussions, because if let's say that a convention has to shut down because there's not enough attendance, then the hotel that is supported by the conventions will be impacted by selling fewer rooms. The restaurants that support the people staying at the hotels will be impacted because there are fewer guests coming in. And guess who works at those restaurants waiting tables? That's a lot of them are students. They support their education through waiting tables and so forth. They're not going to be able to afford coming to college. And so it comes right back to us, because our enrollment numbers will be impacted by that. So it's a big web, entangled web. And I think, as Russell said, the institutions that have leadership at this time and raise the opportunities, because there is opportunities right here. That's where we need to keep our focus on. Mm-hmm. Not to be completely blindsided by these horrible unemployment numbers. What it means is there is a transformation opportunity, and that's why I'm happy that we're here and talking about this today. So, Brian, I want to, applaud you for taking this initiative to have this conversation, because this is exactly the moment where we need to be looking forward and thinking about what's next.
Well, thank you. We only have 5 minutes remaining, so what I'd like to do is open it up again, and just if there's any questions, please just chat it in, and then also open it up to the presenters if there's any final comments. I know, Michael, I think you were trying to get attention before, but if there's anything that you'd like to add, please feel free.
Yeah, what I was going to say is I think this has been very enlightening in that it really points out that IT leadership now more than ever needs to look at how are they going to enable these transformations that we're talking about. And I think what I've noticed when I'm working with IT staff in education space, they do that already, but now they've got to look at it with all the new challenges in mind. Not only do we have to enable student success and all those things, we've got to think about how we're going to do the business continuity for these new initiatives that we're putting in place. And they may be doing that. I noticed when I'm talking to my customers that I'm not hearing a lot of that yet because they're still focused on how they're going to get there. But we've got to start thinking about those kind of things. But now more than ever, I think we really need to look at, from an IT perspective, how we can be. We're going to have the budget problems we've always had, and in some cases they're going to maybe even be worse. But that doesn't preclude us from being leading in the area of enabling the IT infrastructure to be able to support these types of initiatives, especially when we're talking about the transforming data pool labor force, which has been going on anyway, but now it's going to double or triple the acceleration of how that's going to impact us. And so this type of thought process and this presentation, I think, has been very timely for that message. We appreciate having it. Thanks to all y'all and Brian for putting it together.
Yeah, thank you for everything. I think, again, Mike, Dell specifically has been fantastic in the education space, fantastic in K through 12, and you've been a true partner. I think what we're now looking at is how do we continue to evolve to ensure that we continue to maintain that status for the K through 12 community. And we're constantly looking at ways to better improve and transform our go-to-market strategy. And Russell and Jan, your feedback, and you're on the front lines and you're really developing the strategies to ensure that we're transforming. So thank you for your time. It was extremely valuable for us, and it was extremely valuable for the community. What we'll do from here is the session was recorded. We'll get it sent out to the participants, and if we still have any questions, it'd be great if we could email you any responses. But can't thank you enough for your time. So.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Appreciate it. Be safe, everybody.
Thank you all. Be safe.